Hello. The question I get asked the most as a flight instructor is, how many hours have I got left? How am I doing? How far along in this PPL am I? How long is this PPL going to take? And these are all really great questions. It's really good that you're tracking your progress as much as your instructor is by asking these questions. So keep asking them. But what we're going to look at in this video is things that might mean you take less time or things that might mean you take more time and how to manage those. And essentially, actually, I should say, my name's Finn. I'm a flight instructor in the southeast of the UK. And this YouTube channel here that you're on, my whole aim of it is to give you a bit more ammunition to take into these lessons that you're doing so that your course takes less time. There are sometimes things that us instructors don't have time to fully explain in full amount of depth that I do on this YouTube channel. So one of the main purposes of this is that you can watch a bunch of these videos and take less time in your PPL. And I know that time is money and training is expensive and you want your license so you can fly around without an instructor sat next to you moaning about how you're flying. So I really recommend checking out some of my other videos and spending time on YouTube as a whole. We'll talk about why in a minute. Let's delve in. And actually, the first question I'm going to answer is not how long your PPL will take, but how long a PPL can take. So it's 45 hours is the course, and that's a minimum. And then there's a skills test on the end, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours, something around there. So in reality, that's a minimum. It's quite unlikely that you'll pass with a minimum, but I really want you to aim to do so. And then if you miss that target, then maybe you will only be a couple of hours over. But really try and aim to pass for the minimum hours. But one thing I think that we should be talking about right from the start is how PPL training differs from probably quite a lot of training you've done in your life so far, in that it's not graded. You don't get an A, B, or C grade. You don't get a first class honours or a 2-1 with your PPL. There is in fact just pass and fail, and that's because there's a minimum standard. And rightly so, there should be a minimum standard because it's about safety of others around you and you. So I'm not apologetic at all, and no flight instructor or examiner will be apologetic about telling you that you're not quite ready yet, or that you need to do a slight bit more training, because we've got your best intentions at heart. So that's one thing that's really worth thinking about. It's a bit more like your driving test. You have to meet a minimum standard to pass. And actually it's quite similar really, in that it's a safety issue. So how many hours will my PPL take? Well, as we said before, I'm not really sure. We're going to look at here today what a 45-hour PPL course looks like, the common places students get stuck at, and the kind of things you can do to pass your PPL in the minimum amount of time. So let's get started. The 45-hour PPL course looks a bit like this. It's broken down into 45 hours total. 25 hours you have to do that with an instructor at least, and at least 10 hours on your own, although the instructor's supervising you from the ground somewhere. You'd have noticed that doesn't add up to 45, so there's a bit of wiggle room. You can go either way. 5 of those solo hours have to be cross-country hours. You can't just do 10 hours spinning around in the circuit. And there's also a flight that you've got to do in your PPL course where you land at 2 different aerodromes, and it has to be 150 nautical miles long in total. It's a nice long flight that is. Fun flight that as well. If you've not done that already, really great fun. Good to look forward to. But that doesn't really answer our question. How is this broken down into actual training standards? So essentially a PPL course looks a bit like this, about 10 hours, and I've really super simplified this, I should say. So if you're an instructor watching this and thinking, is that how you do it? Then I've super simplified this, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. Your training is tailored to you by your flight instructor, so you can easily complete this section in 5 or 6 hours if you're some sort of sky god, or maybe it takes 20 hours. No shame either way. Your flight instructor is tailoring this to you. So anyway, about 10 hours of your course should be basic handling, so basic control of the aircraft. This is where you learn to fly straight level, climbing, descending, turning, stalling, that sort of thing. Then about 10 hours in the circuit, just learning how to take off and land. And really the aim is you should be going solo about halfway along there. So about hour 15, 16. hesitate to put an hour on it. But really, if you're going to complete your minimum hours, going solo around hour 15-ish, in the teens certainly, it's going to be quite important. Then after you've done the circuit work, and this is in no particular order, there's about 20 hours of navigation. The reason it's quite so much navigation is because once you start to fly long distances, this time starts to really build up. So if you want to go fly to another airfield, the closest one is probably at least 30 minutes away. So maybe 40 minutes away. So already you're talking about an hour and a half, and then you do that a couple of times, and all of a sudden you start to build up quite a lot of time. So about 20 hours of navigation flights. Ideally going solo nav, your first solo nav, around hour 25, maybe 30, something like that is a good thing to aim for. And then after that, you do about 5 hours, and sometimes this won't actually be at the end. Sometimes this will be put around before the navigation or around it. More sort of advanced handling, sort of steep turns, instrument flight, spiral dive recovery, that sort of stuff. And then there's a mock test at the end, and you may need some revision after that mock test. So the more time you can save, the more time you've got to revise for the test at the end. So that's how it's sort of broken down in a sort of a training perspective. These are some of the common reasons straight off the bat that I find, and from talking to other instructors as well, they find students take longer than 45 hours. The big one is probably not able to train often. If you're going to do if you're going to come and do one lesson a month, great. I totally respect that, and in fact, I think this is a really great way to make this affordable. Because what you're talking, I don't know how much you pay for your flight lessons, but it's much more affordable to spread out like that, and probably cheaper than membership of a golf course or a gym or an expensive gym, to be honest. So I think a great way to do it, but it is going to take you longer. Every single lesson you learn something, the more time between that and the next time you get to practice what you've learnt, the more your skills are going to fade. So if you're unable to train at least every week, ideally, I think if you want to pass your license in 45 hours, then really you want to be training maybe twice a week. Consider aiming for that. So that's one thing that can make your course take longer. No shame in why this might be. We spoke about how it could be money commitments, easy to fund it, the less you train. Maybe work commitments. Maybe you've got a big job. A job I used to have meant I had to go away for months, big months on end, and that meant that if I was trying to train at the same time, then there'd be big gaps in my training, so that can really affect it. Weather, if you, like me, who live in the UK, then weather is a constant struggle when you're doing your flight training to really get up there. There can be weeks on end in the winter where the clouds just sit at a couple hundred feet above the ground, like today, and you just can't go flying. Also, if you're a popular flight school, they may struggle with instructor or aircraft availability, or if you're a really small flight school, the same thing might be. I'm not going to say whether that's a good thing, bad thing. It can be signs of both good and bad things. Another thing that might mean you take longer than 45 hours is swapping aircraft or flight schools. Let's deal with that in two parts, actually. If you swap an aircraft in the middle of your training, I see students have to go back, relearn checklists, relearn procedures. The things will, your muscle memories can have to be relearned because controls are in slightly different places. If you're considering swapping an aircraft in the middle of your PPL course, I would say don't, unless you can avoid it, really stop. Get your license in the aircraft you're training in, unless you've only got a couple of hours in, and swap the aircraft after you've got your license. Way easier to do it when you're a much more accomplished pilot. And insofar as swapping flight schools, this could be two things. One, if you swap airfields, you're going to have to relearn new procedures at that new airfield. If you swap flight schools, that school's going to want to probably just recap a few things and check where you're at before carrying on with the course. So don't be surprised if your instructor at a new flight school says, hang on, let's just go back a little bit and check that you've covered everything. Nothing against you, nothing against your flight school you've come from. That is just common. And if the other thing is, if you've changed airfields, same thing. It's going to take a couple of hours just to get used to the new airfield. And another thing that the students, I would say, that take the longest are the ones that just rock up and say, "Hey, teach me to fly." and then don't do any practice or work or do the minimum in between. So arrive prepared. I'm going to show you in a bit how you can do that. Next thing, I see students who are not used to controlling things, whether this be cars, motorbikes, bicycles, computer games, whatever. If you're not used to controlling things, the connection in your brain between your sort of the hand-eye coordination, I think you would call it, and your sort of motor skills, they're not going to be as perfected as someone who's used to controlling something that's moving around and has to be sort of controlled. So if you're not used to controlling things, I've been very vague about what that could be, because I'm not saying that you won't pass on minimum time if you haven't got your driving license. That's not true at all. But if you're not used to controlling things, even if that's your push bike, then it might take you a bit longer. The training environment might mean you take a bit longer than 45 hours, and not always for a negative reason. You may find yourself coming out with a higher sort of level of training from some training environments that are hard to train in. For example, if there's long transits to a practice area, that probably means you're in an area of complex airspace. Then naturally there's going to be a bunch more time added into your flight lessons, whether you like it or not. But if you're used to flying in complex airspace, then you're probably going to be a more accomplished pilot when you do pass your PPL. So there's pros and cons to both of these things. If you train from a complicated airfield, or maybe a big one where there's lots of commercial aviation going on, that can also sometimes cause you extra delays, which just add on time to your PPL that didn't really need to be there and is totally out of your control. But on the other hand, if you're used to flying around those big commercial aircraft at those big airfields, then I know your radio is going to end up being on this A game, and your situational awareness is going to be good. So there's pros and cons, but it just means your course might take a bit longer. Next thing I want to talk about was common stages that students get stuck at. There's kind of a few stages really that are really common. I don't want to dwell on them too much, but the basic handling essentially. So, and I think the main thing I see students getting stuck at is maintaining and holding attitudes. So if you find yourself sort of 15, 20 hours into your course and your instructor keeps on making you do climbing, descending, turning, stalling, all these, then think about what you're doing. Are you holding the attitudes properly? Are you controlling the aircraft properly? Are you being too ham-fisted with the controls? Are you being too sensitive? Are you not confident enough that you can handle that aircraft? Think about that a little bit and maybe chat to your instructor about it. And really, the big thing we're teaching at those early stages of your license are that the performance of the aircraft, i.e. what the aircraft's going to do, is based on the power of the aircraft and the attitude of the aircraft. Just those two things. That's the big thing we're teaching you in the first 10 or so hours. So that's one of the common stages students get stuck at. The next is probably in the circuit, understanding and judging the landing. There's tons of other things in the circuit that can hold you up, whether it be the radio or your general airmanship and situational awareness. To get those things, you need a lot of spare capacity. To be good at the radio, to be good at knowing what's going on around you, need a lot of spare capacity, which comes from really just practicing flying more and the flying taking up less of your capacity. But also a really hard thing that every single pilot flying today, licensed, unlicensed training, will tell you, that understanding and judging the landing is the hardest bit. It's the trickiest bit. It's not impossible by any means, and totally possible for you to get it, but it is tricky. And I think it's tricky mostly because it's pure split-second judgment based on indicators around you. As an instructor, and if you're an instructor watching this, you'll know this is one of the harder things to teach, because it becomes, it's so transient and it's happening so quickly, it's quite hard to narrate to encourage students to take particular control inputs. You're trying to teach them actually where to look for certain signals, and then what they should be doing with their hands and feet. And those judgments need to happen quicker than you and I can really talk. So it's really hard, but you will get it if you are struggling. Do not worry. I'm going to show you a few things in a bit that might help. And then navigation. The next big section is, look, all of a sudden you've learned how to fly the aircraft, take off and land, brilliant, and then we go and make you do loads of stuff while you're flying. And there's a huge uptick in the amount of workload you have to do when you're flying in the navigation section, and really this relies on you as a trainee pilot, with the assistance of your instructor, finding a good system that works for you to manage that workload better. It's really common to see students getting behind the aircraft. So look, just get systems in place that work. Get a kneeboard system where everything's in the right place. Get where's your pen going to live? Where, really sit down and think about all that kind of thing. Next thing I want to talk about is things that you can do. So we've maybe been a bit negative so far, things that are going to slow you down. Here are some things you can do. These are things I've seen lots of students have been really successful do, and also things I've seen me or other instructors suggest to students to do that have sped up their training. So the first thing, really the biggest or most obvious thing, is to get some flying experience. I mean, that would be easy, wouldn't it? If you knew how to fly before your PPL, then it would be easy. I mean, but that may sound ridiculous, but gliding's a cheap and accessible hobby, and all glider pilots I've trained have exceptional handling skills. So a really good thing to do before your PPL, maybe a cheap way to get into it. Another thing you can do is go join the air cadets. They might get you doing some gliding. They'll probably take you up for some experienced flights, and they'll probably not charge you much or anything for it. So that's really worth doing. Remote control aircraft, something I came across recently. A student of mine just understood a lot of the controls because they'd flown around remote control aircraft loads. A similar thing like that might be flight simulators. So don't feel with flight simulators that you have to spend £4,000 on a huge rig a huge computer that's going to support the high-end flight simulator, or don't think you have to go into the British Airways base and get one that's moving around on its base. To be honest, if you get a £5 flight sim on your phone, this will be enough, and practice that way on the train or board or whatever. This will be enough to get things flowing a bit more, and understand a lot of things that you may have had to do practically for a few hours to get. So I really recommend flight sims. Every student I've had that's been into flight simulators has had some small habits to adjust, but mainly has had a really amazing understanding of it. And if you want to take it to the next level and go fly online in your flight simulators, and talk to people who are pretending to be air traffic controllers, then great, your radio skills are going to be amazing before you even step in the real aircraft. And the other thing I've written here is sit in the back of other students' lessons. That's a really great way to get flying experience. So if you know someone else learning to fly, then and someone else learning to fly in a 4-seater aircraft would be best, go and ask them, hey, do you mind if I sit in the back? It's a really great thing to do. Don't be surprised if you then have to repay the favour. And if you don't know anyone who's learning to fly, hang around in the club for long enough and you will find someone. And my real big thing here is, and I think this is something that my whole channel really advocates, is really learning on the ground, not in the air. The aircraft is a loud environment with turbulence, it's cramped, it's hot or cold, you're hurtling around the sky. It's not really it can be quite a stressful environment. Even if you're not stressed about it, there are physiological stresses there that will stress your body whether you like it or not. So it's not the perfect classroom. So really the best thing you can do is learn on the ground and then just perfect it in the air. So really one big thing I think you should do is really know exactly what every single flight you're doing is, what it's going to be, and make sure you've read up about it. There are plenty of other companies that do flight books, but if you get Pooley's book 1 and ask your instructor at the end of every lesson, okay, cool, what lesson are we doing next? Or are we just revising this one? Go and read that whole section on that lesson, make sure you know it inside out, and then you're going to find the flying way easier. So really do your research. And here's a big thing. Complete all your theory exams before you start your lessons if you can. If you're maybe trying to save up money to do your PPL, this is a brilliant time to stop saving up for a second, spend a couple £100 on some books and a couple £100 on some exams, and really you can get that taste of aviation sooner. And then what this means is you're never going to be turning around to your flight instructor and say, oh, sorry, you can't send me solo yet because I haven't done all the exams, or I can't do this yet because I haven't done all the exams. So really just get them done, smash them out before, before you even start is my recommendation. Other things you can do, other ways to be prepared on the same vein really, is get your medical done before you start your training, and get your gear early on, so you're never sort of waiting for something to be delivered, whether it be like a knee board or a chart. I'm going to do a different video which may or may not be out yet. I haven't done it quite yet on what gear you should get. It doesn't have to be expensive, doesn't have to be top of the range, it can be basic, but there's certain things that are going to help you, and there's certain things that you're going to be they're going to sort of speed on your training. And really what I'd say also is the students that pass in the fewest hours are the ones that often are the most immersed in the subject. They speak aviation. They've read up and studied it enough that they know they can pick up these complicated subject matters quicker than someone who's new to aviation, essentially. So here's some ways to immerse yourself in the subject. Number one, you're already doing well done. Watch some YouTube videos. I know mine aren't the best out there. They're not the only ones out there. There's some really great YouTubers out there. If you're learning in the UK, I'd really recommend checking out The Flying Reporter, Rory on Air. I can't remember the names of some of the other ones there, but there's some really great ones out there. Get immersed, learn their language, even if you don't know what they're talking about. Hearing those words in that context is going to help you later on. Listen to some aviation podcasts. There's tons of great ones out there. There's an old one that they don't really do anymore called Flaps. It's very amusing. Get yourself reading books, websites, magazines. Get yourself really immersed in that. There's this magazine in the UK called Flyer that's now free to read online. So just Google that, Flyer magazine, and read that online for free. There you go, you're welcome. And another way to immerse yourself in the subject, like I was saying a second ago, is hang out in a flight school. Listen to the conversations that are going on. Ask questions. People who are hanging out in the flight school are there to talk about aviation and are not going to be afraid to answer your questions. Don't think it's stupid. If they have to rush off and take a lesson, if it's an instructor there, then they will. But there's all that knowledge just hanging out in that room. Hang about for a bit. Get there a bit early. Stay on a bit late. Get involved in the chat and the conversation. And you'll find things that have come up in that room will then come up later in your lessons. So really immerse yourself. Other things you can do, stay motivated. It can be hard learning to fly. You are going to get to some stages where you're learning plateaus. Don't be disheartened about that. Keep it up. You are going to get to some stages where you feel like you are failing. And it's not true. You just haven't met the required standard yet. So make sure you're concentrating on what you can work on, but also what you did well. And if your instructor hasn't told you, ask them. So really stay motivated. It can be tough learning to fly, but it is so much fun. But look, just remind yourself why you want this PPL. I recommend, if your dream is getting a PPL, then your CPL, then going and working for British Airways, then go meet a British Airways captain, get your picture taken with them, or go look around one of the aircraft you want to fly, go up onto the flight deck after a flight or whatever, get a picture taken, put that picture up somewhere where you see it fairly often, have that reminder of your motivation around you. Or if you just want to fly to France and get a burger from Le Touquet and bring back some cheap wine and cheese, then brilliant. Do that with a friend, or get a picture of Le Touquet stapled somewhere. Really good ways to remind yourself and keep yourself motivated about what your goals are. Another thing is, well, and I don't think most people who fly have any problem in this, but make sure you're telling other people about why you're doing what you want to do and how it's going. Get that support network around you, stay motivated, and really, most of all, enjoy it. Have fun. Flying is probably one of the best things you will ever do. I'm so happy that you've decided to learn to fly. Really, really enjoy it. Even in those moments where it's hard, take a split second while you're downwind in the circuit and it's not all going right. Just look out the window, pinch yourself, remind yourself what you're doing is amazing fun. We're so lucky to have that view out of our window when we go flying. Really, really, really enjoy it. I really mean that. So, how long does your PPL take? Don't know. How long might it take? 45 hours plus your skill test. How long might it take? There's no maximum. Things that you might get stuck on: basic handling, circuits, navigation, really common areas to get stuck on. Hopefully I've gone through some key points there with you about what you can do to make it take less time. But really, the fact that you're doing it alone is great, and the fact that you will get there one day is also amazing if you're not there already. So look, really keep enjoying your PPL. Ask your instructor how many hours you got left all the time, and they will tell you, watch this video. All right, thanks for watching.